Thanks everyone for being here today. Thanks to the Legal Network for putting this panel together. I will just let you know that I am joining you today from so-called Vancouver on the stolen lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And I'm going to talk a little bit today about the decriminalization movement in Vancouver specifically. And in particular, I want to talk about the street-based and grassroots pressure that was put on virtually every level of government to decriminalize drug possession by way of something called an exemption. And the exemption provision is found in the Controlled Drugs and Substances Act, Canada's federal drug law, and it basically allows the federal Minister of Health to exempt any person or group of people from any offense in the drug laws. It's a very broad and expansive power. So that includes exempting people from the offense of personal drug possession. This is a quick way to affect policy and to provide immediate harm reduction to people who use drugs. It is absolutely not enough. As Elle and others pointed out, we need abolition, we need housing, wealth redistribution, legal regulation, a safe supply, all of these things. But it is necessary as a basic measure, provided that it is expansive enough to actually apply to and protect people who most need the benefits of decriminalization. So at the end of last year, the city of Vancouver caved to community-based pressure and basically began the process of applying to Health Canada for an exemption that would apply to everyone in Vancouver. And this makes it the first city in North America to pursue decriminalization, at least this way. And they refer to it as the Vancouver model. I do want to emphasize that, like with all drug policy progress, this was not an organic or spontaneous act of benevolence from the state. It never is. This stuff is hard-earned, and it is a direct consequence of the push-pull from the street level. So this was something that was pushed for. Again, it's incremental, it's not enough, but it's some sort of progress. In May of 2021, after some back and forth between Vancouver and Health Canada, Vancouver submitted its final application. And I'll just go over some of the details of what the Vancouver model is proposed to look like. And this is what Vancouver has proposed to Health Canada. So under the Vancouver model, people aged 19 and over are not subject to criminal penalty if they're found to possess certain substances below a certain amount. So the Vancouver model covers 15 substances, including heroin, fentanyl, cocaine, crack, and amphetamines, and then only certain amounts of those substances. So a person can have a maximum of 2 grams of opioids, 3 grams of cocaine, 1 gram of crack. If you possess for your own use a substance above that threshold amount, you are still criminalized. If you traffic rather than simply possess for your own use, a substance above or below that threshold amount, again, you are still criminalized. And on top of that, in any scenario where drug possession is occurring, the Vancouver Police Department have been mandated to provide what they call voluntary referrals to health services in Vancouver. So there's been significant criticism of the Vancouver model, including from groups like the Vancouver Area Network of Drug Users, VANDU, Pivot, and the Legal Network. We say that the threshold amounts prescribed by the city are way too low. They fail to acknowledge that people purchase substances in bulk for use over an extended period of time, just as someone might purchase groceries or cigarettes that they don't intend to use all at the same time. And the result is that people who are deemed to fall outside of the scope of the average drug user will not be protected. And in fact, will probably face additional police crackdowns now that police are sort of emboldened to enforce above threshold possession. We also take major issue with the over-involvement of police, both in the decision-making process and the fact that they'll continue to be the first point of contact for people who use drugs. So police were effectively given a veto power by the city when it came to identifying threshold amounts. And, you know, at the end of the day, people who use drugs were largely left out of the process. So police had the upper hand the entire way through. I want to focus on the really important resistance that Vandu led with respect to the Vancouver model and the city's proposed threshold amounts. So Vandu was largely left out of the process of defining threshold amounts and developing this project, despite the fact that they issued numerous letters and statements, oftentimes with pivot, about the need to follow the direction of people who use drugs. So when the city went ahead and identified its thresholds anyway, Vandu conducted a rapid user-led evaluation of over 160 drug users in the downtown east side to show that the amounts of drugs people were buying was far higher than the city's amounts. It was about 3 to 4 times higher in most cases. And that the Vancouver model would therefore not assist or protect people in the downtown east side. Unfortunately, the city did not amend its application, and it submitted its final application as is at the end of last month. So Vandu subsequently made the principal decision to leave both the City of Vancouver working group and then also refuse to be a part of the evaluation committee. And we fully support them in that decision and stand beside them in it. So that's the view from Vancouver, where we don't have a response yet from Health Canada in terms of whether the application is approved or whether additional information will be needed, but we hoped to have a response sooner rather than later. And I do just lastly want to note that shortly after Vancouver submitted its first exemption request, BC's Minister of Mental Health and Addictions asked the Federal Minister of Health whether she'd consider granting a similar exemption to the province of BC. It wasn't a straight out ask for an exemption, which, you know, would seem to be the natural thing to do if you really wanted this to happen. But she kind of inquired if it was something that might be considered. The latest update is that in April, the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions announced that it would in fact be submitting a formal request and that it is working on an agreement with Health Canada in terms of what a BC model might look like. I suspect the BC model will be even more conservative than Vancouver's. And it's unclear yet, you know, how that provincial exemption, if approved, will interact with or react to the Vancouver exemption if it's granted. In both cases, these exemption processes, you know, when people who use drugs and advocates made the call for decriminalization, we wanted a broad exemption that would apply to everyone, all substances, all amounts. And what we ended up getting was something quite disappointing, and remains to be seen how effective it will be. But it certainly has been a major learning lesson in compromise. And yeah, I think that's it for me. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Caitlin. Maybe we can come back to that final point about the Federal Prosecution Service guidelines in the discussion. Thank you so much for that overview of what's been happening in Vancouver and BC. And again, it's a reminder that every single modest potential advance here is the result of a lot of hard work and advocacy, and yet still doesn't get us where we need to in terms of the fundamental transformative change in our legal and policy environment. But they are steps forward, so we must continue.